Bonjour tout le monde! Today we are going to look at three categories of verbs. This is primarily to help year 8s with this week's work and this unit work basically, because we've introduced reflexive verbs, also known as pronominal verbs. And I figure it will be easier to understand what this is all about if you also have a little view of transitive verbs and intransitive verbs. So these might seem like complex concepts, but they're quite easy if we just look at what it looks like in English and then in French. Did I want to say anything else? I don't think I did. So yeah, primarily aimed at year 8s, but obviously any year group could probably benefit from this if you have a doubt about what type of verbs there are. So first, let's look at transitive verbs. Transitive verbs are probably one of the most common ones that you're already pretty used to. So we've got a pattern which is a subject doing the action of the verb onto a direct object without needing any preposition. That's it. The subject is doing the verb to something, but there's no need for a little preposition. So for example, in French, you could say je fais un gâteau, and that would be in English, I am making a cake. That's an example of a transitive verb. Fait, am making, is the verb, and the subject, je or I, is basically using fait to make a cake. That's a transitive verb. Okay? Intransitive verb is when the verb makes sense on its own. It doesn't actually need a direct object. So, for example, je danse, I am dancing. You don't need to say, sorry, this is really not convenient. You don't need to add anything. Je danse on its own makes sense. I am dancing. So that's an intransitive verb. Intransitive, you don't need an object. Transitive, you need an object. And that's it. The verb acts on an object for transitive verbs, and it doesn't act on an object for intransitive verbs. Now we're going to move on to pronominal verbs, and we have two categories for that. The first one is one that you've probably already met before, and that's where your subject is accompanied by a reflexive pronoun. Reflexive because it reflects. So it's a bit like a mirror. I'm afraid I'm going to drop my phone again. It's a bit like a mirror. So you have your subject, you have a reflexive pronoun, and then you have the verb. But the verb's action is basically reflected back onto the subject instead of being done to something else. The first example you've met in French for that is je m'appelle, which is literally I call myself. Actually, literally, it will be I myself call. So it's reflexive because the action of calling is going back onto the subject. Now in English, you would say I call myself, which is a bit weird. You translate that into my name is. And this is the tricky part with French reflexive verbs and German reflexive verbs also. It's because verbs that need to be reflexive in German and French will not necessarily translate into reflexive verbs in English. So you'd understand if someone says, I call myself, blah, 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 but it's clumsy. And also you might think, well, if that's what you call yourself, what's your actual name though? So the actual translation is my name is. What matters is for pronominal verbs, the first case scenario, reflexive, is basically where we have a mirror effect. So the action of the verb is mirrored back onto the subject. Okay? And then the one that you've seen in this week's resource, if we're up to date, is where we have reciprocity, where it's reciprocal. So I probably butchered that pronunciation. So your pronominal verb can also be when the action of the verb is done mutually by two people or more than two people. So this time it's not a mirror, but it's a reciprocal situation. I've tried to represent it with the arrow going around. I'm not very happy with that, but it doesn't. I couldn't think of a better way. So you have your subject, you have your verb, and the reflexive pronoun shows that there's a bunch of people acting together and the action is mutual. So for example, on se parle. If you take away se, then you have on parle, which is just we talk. But on se parle is we talk to each other. So we to each other talk. So you have an idea of mutual action here. So pronominal verbs will either show you an action that's done back onto the subject, reflexive, or an action that's done mutually by a group of people and everybody's taking part. And that's the one that you've got in your relationship lesson. So when we said on se dispute, we argue, you have different people taking part in an argument. Otherwise, it's not an argument, it's just you shouting at people. So then, the last thing to look at is the reflexive pronouns. They need to match their subject. So in this video, I've been putting subjects in dark blue, and I've been putting my reflexive pronouns in light blue. They have to match. You wouldn't say, if for example we said the reflexive phrase, I look at myself in the mirror, I and myself have to match. It would be ridiculous to say, I look at herself in the mirror. It makes no sense. The same happens in French. So if you want to be able to use reflexive verbs or pronominal verbs with every single subject, then you need to learn this grid. So with je, we're going to use me if the verb starts with a consonant, or m apostrophe if it starts with a vowel. So we had je m'appelle, we had m apostrophe because appelle started with an A. Tu, we then have te or t apostrophe. Tu t'appelles would be your name is. And then tu te disputes, you're arguing with someone else. Il, elle, and on all use the same. They use se or s apostrophe. So, il se dispute, he argues. Elle s'appelle, her name is. And on se voit would be we see each other. Then we have nous, nous, and vous, vous, which are really nice because you just repeat the same thing. So the subject and reflexive pronouns are the same. And then il and elle plural use the same reflexive pronoun as for il, elle, and on singular. So it's quite handy in a way because you have nous, nous, and vous, vous. You just basically stammer. And then the third person share one unique reflexive pronoun. Tu te has a little anaphora there because you start with the same sound. Or what do you call it? I'm losing my words now. Alliteration. An alliteration with a te sound. And then je me reminds you of me, myself, and I, so that makes sense. And that's it. These are the reflexive pronouns. If you're struggling with that, you could just focus on just using the je me bits, and on se, they would probably be the priority. And that's it. So that was hopefully a good video for you to get to grips with transitive, intransitive, and pronominal verbs, and therefore understand pronominal verbs that we've done this week better. Pronominal means that either it's an action you're doing to yourself or an action that's happening in a group with some mutual action, so mutual aspect happening. So yeah, let me know if this helped in the comments below. If you have any questions regarding the work that you're doing online, please do feel free to ask either by email or in the comments, and then I can see if I can make some more videos like this. There's no intro and outro because it's filmed on my phone, and so no video editing because my old laptop doesn't want to do it. That's it for today. Take care of yourself. Keep up the good work. A lot of you are working really, really hard and it's amazing. So well done. Good progress, good learning, and good self-management there. So you're amazing, guys. Keep being amazing. And I will see you later. Bye.